You came here to see how I model a stylized shield, right? Before we get to that, let me tell you a story like an old grandpa. As you all probably know, practice makes perfect. This is why it's important to do exercises on a regular basis. My way of not getting rusty is, I do 30-minute speed modeling challenges where I try to model an item from start to finish. In this case, I picked a stylized shield. And since I already have tutorials on just about every topic, I thought you may be interested in a commented walkthrough to watch or even follow along. If you are a complete beginner in Blender or 3D modeling, check out the following link, which will get you to this level in no time. When modeling flat objects, I like to start off with a simple plane. And since a shield is rather symmetrical, I will mirror it along the x-axis using the free add-on Auto Mirror. If you didn't already install it, go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons and activate it. It is one of the essential add-ons you will always use. Let's get rid of the face, since I want to block out the outer shape with words only. This way I have a better control about the topology. In this step I will form the outer shape. When I need more vertices, I add them with Ctrl R. I try to stick to as little verts as possible and use the subdivision modifier to create a smooth curve. When you add the modifier, you already see how everything becomes smoother. Apply the subdivision modifier and let's try to move it before the mirror modifier. Maybe apply the mirror modifier first? I think this should work. Yes. Let's mirror it again and correct the top corner. And here we have a nice outline for a shield with a smooth curve. To fill this out, I will delete the middle edge to make things easier. And filling out shapes like this is pretty simple. Just imagine this would be a circle. I will extrude the outer loop and press S to scale it inwards. The first loop I extrude will define the thickness of the iron frame I want to create later on. And after that, I will just try to come up with a good topology. Do not hesitate to add additional loop cuts. Some pulleys more are not a big deal. It is much more important to have good topology, which enables you to work with. Okay, beautiful. Let's select the inner verts and use Blender's Smooth Vertices function to spread them out. I think this looks really good already. Let's create the iron frame by extruding the outer face loop. And now that we have created one side, we can use the mirror modifier to create the other. Apply the active mirror modifier and add a new one, which we use on the y-axis. And when you go into edit mode and select all your faces, you can move it in the y-axis to set the thickness you want. Let's apply this mirror modifier also and fill the middle part by selecting two opposite edges and pressing F. And then select the outer edge and hold F until it is fully filled. Let's get rid of the middle two edge loops, or you know what, let's leave them for details later. We can remove them in our final version. Now to get the typical curved shape, I will select the center edge loop and move it in the y-axis with proportional editing turned on. You can increase the radius with the mouse wheel. Let's curve it just a little bit. Bring it back to position and reset the origin to 3D cursor again. And we already have a pretty nice block out of a shield. To create the iron reinforcements on the corners, I will select some faces, which I will use as a base for modeling. Duplicate them with Shift D and separate them as an on object with a press on P and select Selection. Let's mirror them again to only model one side. And try to come up with an interesting form. Toggling the X-ray mode helps you to see your mesh better. And make sure to turn off proportional editing. What I want to create are simply some shapes that are slightly larger than the rest of the iron frame. This will give the shield a more robust look, I hope, and some details are always good to have. Always think about the effect of shapes. Rectangular shapes look more robust and create trust, while sharp spikes or triangles are more evil. So try to come up with something interesting. If you want to have a more evil looking shield, make this 3-corner spiky. I think I will just increase the speed of this part since it is just moving vertices back and forth. time for a little bit more details. This metal reinforcement must of course also be attached somehow, so let's make some kind of rivets by creating a UV sphere and deleting one half. Make sure to always go in X-ray mode if you want to select all vertices. Squash it a little bit in height, and I will use the snap function to position the rivets correctly. By configuring snap correctly, you can make your object rotate automatically to match the surface of the underlying geometry. So place it somewhere near the position where you want to have it, turn on snap with face project mode, and make sure to turn on these two checkboxes. You should be able to move your geometry now and it will automatically rotate. Add a mirror modifier with the shield as the base to add the rivets to the left side also. And yeah, duplicate them and move them in position. Easy. I like that. This should be fine for a block out of the front side. For the back side I will just add some kind of leather buckle and do not care for much detail. Since this is a low poly shield which should be used for a game, the front is much more important. So I use a plane which I scale to fit in width, move it behind the shield and try to come up with a simple leather strip. With the X-ray turned on, you can actually see what you're doing through the shield. I will first extrude the upper edge to limit the upper boundary, then the same for the bottom, and using loop cuts I create faces which I will snap to the shield. So as I used for the rivets for the whole object, I will now use snapping to only snap single faces. Turn off snapping again and create some additional loop cuts to refine the shape of my leather strip. Maybe I just don't care for the poly count now and show you again how to use the subdivision modifier to smoothen out shapes. You see it immediately refines the shape in the y-axis but also rounds up the corners. So we can just use loop cuts at the top and bottom to define the roundness of our corners. Make sure to apply rotation and scale with Ctrl A. Now I use the solidify modifier to create a kind of solid look. And check the only rims checkbox and the modifier to save polys. As you see, our normals are pointing in the wrong direction, so you can just flip them and the normals drop down. And since I will not change anything here, I will apply the modifier. What is bad with the normals flipping in the solidify modifier is that it doesn't really flip your normals, it influences only the modifier. You can check this when you open the overlays panel and check face orientation. Everything that is red is the back side of the face. You can select all wrong faces in edit mode and press Alt-N, flip to fix them, or just press Shift-N, which is recalculate normals. Let's shade everything smooth and look at our current state. Always try to name your objects correctly, it will really save you a lot of headache later. And since we will go into sculpt mode really soon, we have to apply all mirror modifiers beforehand. And before I forget, let's add rivets to the leather strip also. I will duplicate one of my previously created and move it to position to use the snap feature again. And do so for the bottom one. Beautiful. Let's organize our objects now. Name them correctly and apply the mirror modifier. You have to do so since it does not really interact well with the multi-resolution modifier, which we will use to add polys for sculpting or details. I like to organize my low poly model in a separate collection and suffix them with _LP for baking. What I also like to do is set the origin of each object to 3D cursor. This also can save some headaches later. Okay, quick recap. What we have done now is a low poly version of our shield. This is also the version that will later be used for texturing and export for, I don't know, a game engine or whatever. What we now need is a copy on which we will sculpt details. So I will simply duplicate everything and move it into a new collection, which I name HB for high poly. Let's turn off the low poly collection for now and focus on the high poly one. As we saw previously with the subdivision modifier, when we subdivide, our corners and edges are rounded. The same happens when you add the multi-resolution modifier, it's basically the same process. What we did to fix the round corners is to add an additional loop cut, but there is also another way. You can simply select the edges, which should be sharp, and in the panel here, which you can open by pressing N, you see edge data under item. Adjust the mean crease to about 1 depending on how sharp you want those edges to be, and they should turn pink. Now when you add a multi-resolution modifier and hit subdivide, you see that it stays sharp. I usually subdivide to a level of 5 for sculpting details. And we can finally go into sculpt mode. The first thing I will do is separate the iron frame from the wooden part for sculpting. And Blender has a great feature to do so, called face sets. Yeah. You can simply select your faces in edit mode, tap back to sculpt mode and click on face set from edit mode selection. And when you have done everything correct, your model should have more color than before. To use this face set as a mask now, you have to enable a setting which you can find here, auto masking face sets. Now the brush will only apply its effect on the face set you first clicked. Let's turn on mirroring on the x-axis, and I will start with my favorite brush, the scrape brush, which is extremely useful to give a model a stylized look. I will simply add some damage to the sharp edges of my iron frame, because you always have to think about the usage of your object when doing details. A shield, for example, will probably have very damaged edges, since it may be thrown on the ground or often fall over when put down, and also when defending, I think the probability to be hit on the edge is higher than in the wooden part, as sword strokes are often swept and not stabbed, like with a rapier. In the end, I have no idea, it's just my logical thinking. Maybe I'm just an idiot and it's all wrong. When I create details like this, I often start with mirroring on the x-axis to save some time. What I pay special attention to is that I don't overdo it and change the shape way too much. The reason is that I do not want to retopologize my low poly version of the shield anymore, and when the shape differs too much, it just doesn't look good when baking. A good way to add asymmetry is not only to add details but also to remove them. You can use the multi-res displacement eraser to remove details from your multi-resolution modifier. I think it is time to use some alpha textures. All textures I use are self-made, and you can find the link in the video description where you can get them. For alpha textures, I always use the inflate brush. Do not ask why, there is no reason. To use a brush for textures correctly, you should change the mapping to view plane in the brush properties, and let me also decrease the sample bias for this texture. If you don't know what the heck is going on here, you should probably watch my tutorial on details. I will leave a link in the description. Last but not least, change the stroke to uncut, and let's try it out. I personally think this level of detail is not necessary here for the iron frame, since this can also be done in the texturing process, but I cannot remember if I have metal textures that have stylized details. I think I only have realistic ones. So let's just do it. For a stylized look, you want to keep the details kind of flat and not add too tiny ones. But the main part to give an object a stylized look comes with texturing. Let's not overdo it and continue with the wooden part. For this, I have prepared a stylized wood pattern texture some time ago, which you can also download. I think I have to switch to a different texture mapping here, since the view plane uncut stroke does not really work. But let's experiment. First, the sample bias has to be correct. I test it out in the side view to better see how much the mesh is raised. And yes, as I thought, this method does not really work out. The corners are smoothed out and I simply do not have enough control to place the pattern as I want to. Let's try out stencil. Move the stenciling position with the right click on the preview, and with a big brush size I will just click 1 or 2 times to apply the stencil on my object. When you hold down Shift, you can scale the stencil with the right mouse button. Let's find a perfect spot, and this looks shit. It's overdone, since I do not have enough control about my brush with uncut mode. We have to change our stroke back from uncut to space. And another try. Yeah, I think this works. It's not that cool that it also sculpted the backside. I should probably turn on front faces only, but since the backside is not that important, it's probably okay. Let's take a look at what we have come up so far. I think we should add a little bit more details like cuts and scratches. I mean, it's a shield, and shields should have at least some kind of damage to tell a story and look interesting. So let's switch our texture mapping back to viewplane and grab one of the other alpha textures I've prepared. Let's test this out and adjust the strength. And for details like this, I will turn off the face set masking since they have to go through all parts. This looks almost good to use. I think I will just play around with the sample bias a little bit, but other than that, it's fine. For details like this, it is often good to start with an alpha texture and switch to another brush to refine them a little bit later. So I will just place some cuts around the shield and then maybe use the grab brush to change the shape, or the crease brush to make some of the cuts deeper, or even the pitch brush to refine the width of the cuts. It is important to create variety. The human eye will always recognize patterns and repetitions. As you see here, my model lacks pulleys to add additional details. The mesh starts to look weird and vertices start to overlap, so I will just increase my level of subdivisions in the multi-res modifier. Looks fine now, but the sample bias is still wrong. Maybe just a little bit less. Perfect. When sculpting details on the multi-res modifier, you will often have these overlaps, but you can fix them by smoothing with the Shift key. Or just remove the details there and add them somewhere where there is more space. Let's try out another alpha texture. You see, getting to a good result is often trial and error. Yes, I think the little cuts look much better. Smooth out some of the not so beautiful parts, even if they will barely be visible after baking. And I think I will quit here. Less is more. Let's go back to object mode and continue with the other parts. For a speed model / sculpt, it looks pretty good, I think. For the corners we have to set the mean crease again before adding the multi-res modifier and apply the mirror modifier as before. And of course, not to forget, apply rotation and scale before going into sculpt mode. As for the multi-res, I will again start with a level of 5. Now the same process as before. With the scrape brush I will add some damage to the edges, and again with mirroring turned on to save some time. Do not hesitate to use the grab brush sometimes to fix your mesh, as long as you do not change the shape too much. Time for a little bit of asymmetry, so I will turn off the mirroring and use the grab brush to change the shape of the right side a little bit. And also utilize the eraser to remove some of the detail. The good thing is you have to do this on one side only. Last but not least, our bottom part. Now time for some secondary details again. What you will never see me do is sculpting surface structure. You can often see this in ZBrush videos, for example on skin. This is so overkill and so unnecessary. I mean, why? When you can do this much easier and more performant in the texturing process. If you're interested in the topic how to create good details, check out the link in the description. I recently made a video where I explain the whole process. I mean, of course you can add more and better details, but this video was all about showing the process of how to create a 3D asset and a speed modeling challenge. The whole process took me about 25 minutes. Okay, time for the very last part, the rivets. I will just use the scrape brush and leave on mirroring to give them a little bit of a hammered look. To avoid repetition, you can rotate one of them in edit mode, but I think they are too small to even care about. It's easier to just paint some different color in the texturing process. And what about the leather strip, you ask? Well, stuff like this is also something you better do when texturing. And when you see your meshes overlap like here, it is fine, since this comes from sculpting details. As long as it is okay on your low poly model, you're good to go. And if all else fails, you can also adjust it even when your model is finished and textured. Okay, now there is only the UV unwrap left, and then we can jump straight into texturing. So here is what we have come up so far. We have a finished high poly model and the corresponding low poly model. As for the UV unwrap, I've divided the metal parts from the wooden parts and also created seams everywhere to better spread everything on the UV map. The seams will be barely noticeable with the correct mapping type. The corners also have seams almost everywhere, so they can fill out little gaps in the UV map. The rivets have no seams, they're just unwrapped as they are and can fit into every hole in the UV map. And for the leather strip, I just created seams in the corners to avoid stretching. And together it looks like this. You can maybe squeeze out more, but I'm a lazy ass and it's fine. I hope you learned something, and if you have any question, feel free to use the comment section. I read them all.